Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is a brief video on some of the key meanings of the next set of verses from Surah Al-Mulk, which is verses 6 to 12. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the previous verses that we covered, He spoke about how Allah Azza wa Jalla will punish the shayateen and the devils with a grave punishment, meaning the punishment of the fire. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says that punishment in verse number 6, He says that punishment isn't just restricted to them, but to all of those who disbelieve in their Lord. All of them will have the punishment of the fire, and that is an evil destination. Bi's al-masir. In verse number 7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about some of and describes some of the punishment of the fire. And He says that the people of the fire will hear therein its terrors, and they will hear within it its screams, and they will hear within it the fury of the fire as it burns. In verse number 8, Allah Azza wa Jal says that that fire, because of its intensity, is almost about to burst. And every single time a group of people is thrown into it, the gatekeepers of the fire that are angels will ask them, did not I want to come to you? Were you not told to prepare for this day? Were you not told to believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla and worship Him alone? And they will all attest to that fact, and they will say, yes, in verse number 9. There did come to us a warner, but we disbelieved and we turned away, and we refused to accept that Allah Azza wa Jalla has sent down any type of revelation. And so they were in grave misguidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then mentions how they themselves will speak about themselves, describing themselves in verse 10, and say that if we truly had the ability to listen and to think, we would never have ended up in the fire. And that's because people have the senses of hearing and sight and so on. But it doesn't mean that they use them in the best of ways or the ways that are most beneficial to them. So a person can have eyes, but they don't really see. They can have ears, but they don't really hear. They can have a mind and a brain and a heart, but they don't really think and contemplate. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says in verse 11, فَاعْتَرَفُوا بِذَنْبِهِمْ, they will themselves confess to their errors and their sins, and therefore they will be in the fire to remain therein forever. And then in the final verse, in verse number 12, Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about those people who did fear Allah, and especially in private and in secret, and when they're alone. How those people who turn to Allah, worship Him, fear Him, always are conscious of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, for them will be forgiveness, wa ajrun kabir, and the greatest of reward. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us from amongst those people. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.